Hi, and welcome to another episode of The Big Game Hunters. I'm Mike.
And I'm Tom. Today we're going to review Munchkin from Steve Jackson Games. But first, Chit Chat.
In today's Chit Chat, we're going to be talking about board games, digital board games, and video games. We hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the Chit Chat. Today, we're going to be talking about board games, digital board games, and video games. I think first, we just like to cover kind of why we like board games compared to the other mediums, why we're doing the Big Game Hunters with board games rather than doing it as a video game show.
Sure. Well, for me, the biggest, most appealing aspect of tabletop games, and I include role-playing games and things, but that's the social aspect. You're in the same room with everybody. Not only are you playing the game. For me, the game is maybe an excuse to be in the same room with other people, socializing and just having a good time.
Mm-hmm. I agree that games are inherently social, but I'm not sure that all the talk is just above the table. I think that there's an aspect of tabletop gaming that involves kind of conversing through the game itself. So, there's a quote that I think is attributed to Plato that, you can learn more about somebody in an hour of gaming or an hour of play than in a day of conversation. And so I feel like that kind of applies to board games a little bit. If I'm playing something like Lost Cities, that's pretty much silent. It's a 1v1 tactical strategic card game. Mm-hmm. There's not very much above the game communication. It's not like I really have to tell anything to my opponent. I simply play a card and then draw a card, and he does the same. But the whole time, we're kind of getting in each other's head. Even though we're not saying much, we're trying to think about, okay, what expeditions is he pursuing? What kind of cards is he holding? What are his plays communicating to me about his hand? And then afterward, we kind of end up having that conversation out loud. I'll say, oh, when you played this white 5, I thought for sure you were going to heavily invest in the Arctic expedition. I thought I was screwed because you're holding the 9 and 10, but then you were boldly digging for the 10. So we have, even though that's a very bland game in terms of immersiveness, yeah. I would give it a very low immersion score. There's a conversation happening there. There is communication happening through the card plays. So
the same kind of thing, I guess, does not happen in online games and video games for you?
I think it does to some extent, but with online games, there's a level of separation. Anytime you're playing something over the internet, whether it's a digital board game or an online video game, there's a certain kind of wall there. You're not eyeball to eyeball. You don't have, a lot of times you don't have that post-game conversation. And if I just feel like there's not, you don't sit there and really, it's not as much of a psychological experience, I think. You don't have the time to sit there and analyze your opponents or your teammates the same way you would in a board game. And I don't feel like it has the same level of conversation.
I think there is an element of it, though. For example, in like online video games, maybe you're not delving into the psychology of the people you're playing, but based, like Call of Duty, for example, if you get somebody who's only running around with knives and getting shot all the time, you're pretty sure you're going to put that person on your ignore list, right?
Sure, but like I said, there's that level of separation. You can just press a button and that person vanishes. There's not the, we talked about this before and used the word social contract involved. Okay. There's not the same kind of need to stay at the table and hash it out with people. You can just get up and log off. And
that is one of the great reasons that online board games suffer, I think, is that you don't have that social contract. You don't have the same unspoken agreement with whoever you're playing with that they're going to at least try to play the game. Mm-hmm. They can just get up and log off. And that I think is a big detriment to online board games.
Sure. And I think that can apply to digital games too, digital board games. Because, with an online game, at least you might have voice chat for a lot of those games. But with a digital video game, with like an iPhone game, there's really very little conversation. You can text to each other, but you're not seeing each other face to face, and you're not talking, you're not hearing the other person's voice. I think it's very hard to, if you're playing an iOS game, to then talk about that game and really, break down the experience afterward. Kind of like we mentioned in our critical game reviews episode of the Chit Chat.
Sure, it does happen though. I'm sure there are exceptions. I feel like Words with Friends, I did more chatting with the people I was playing with than I did actually typing the words. Mm-hmm. But that's a good point. Like, I do play certain games, like on my iPhone or whatever, that I just would never consider really playing in real life. Like everybody maybe enjoys a game of Scrabble now and then, but like, I would never engage in a marathon session of Scrabble for 8 hours a day like I do on my phone.
That's not weird.
Well,
just a guy playing a lot of Words with Friends.
Yeah, it's not weird. So, what kind of games then work on the? I've never thought about it. What kind of games work on that kind of device? Whereas games, like in real life, I would totally play Last Night on Earth for 8 hours at a time because that's really fun and engaging.
I think Last Night on Earth would not work on the digital platform very well because any game that relies on that kind of wow factor or that kind of like those immersive components, for instance, the tactile elements.
Oh, okay.
Last Night on Earth, it looks great set up, and it's not going to translate as well into a screen. And in Last Night on Earth also is not it's not a sterile game. I think any game like that where there's a high amount of luck in it and there's a high amount of storytelling in it, you're going to want to play those in person because you're going to want to engage with other people in that story. Whereas I think you lose those aspects when you bring it to a digital platform.
You might feel a little cheated by the system when luck isn't going your way, but when you're at the table in a board game and the luck isn't going your way, it's a challenge of the game. It's a challenge that the game is giving you, but when it's the computer giving it to you, you're a reset button.
And there's just something epic that is diminished when, all right, Last Night on Earth, if you're running around with a baseball bat just clobbering zombies left and right, rolling sixes all day, that experience won't be the same on the iPhone.
No, that's why you have like Plants vs. Zombies and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Conversely, I think the games that would work well on it are that's my fish. At some point, I know one of us said that, that's a game that should be on it. We later found out it is.
Oh, cool. And
I think that's an excellent choice for a transfer because it's a pretty abstract game. We gave it a high abstraction score. And it's not as much about table talk. It's pretty dry in the gameplay. It's pretty strategic. You're just kind of, trying to block off other people and eat the most fish. It's a fun theme, but you don't need the components in front of you.
But like your story with, it may have been last episode with Ticket to Ride, where everybody is so excited at the table, and that really opened your eyes about that game. I think the same thing is true for That's My Fish. It's going to be a much better game in person just because you can have that experience of everyone just really getting possessive over those fish and territorial. That I don't think you'll ever have that kind of experience on a digital device.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think no matter what you translate board game to tablet or whatnot, it's not going to capture everything. There's going to be something lost in the translation.
Is there anything we're missing?
Well, I guess the last thing that comes to mind is the idea of video games that are kind of board game-esque. So we've talked about translating board games to digital versions. We've talked about what the differences between board games and video games. Certainly it's easier to get immersed in video games because of the high quality of graphics and everything now. But what about video games that are kind of board games at heart?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind are games like Tetris or Dr. Mario. They're just like puzzle games, so it's not really within the genre of our show. But those, when I was first playing them, I just really thought of like playing dominoes or those kind of.
Or like Blockus now.
There you
kind
go.
of came full circle.
There you go. Yeah. What about you?
I think of things like StarCraft. I think of basically all the Blizzard games, actually. All the Blizzard games, to some extent, have a kind of board game quality to them.
Sure.
StarCraft, feels like kind of a really, really elaborate, what's the big war game? Axis and Allies.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like Axis and Allies in space to some extent, in the way it works.
Sure.
Warcraft or World of Warcraft particularly makes me think, obviously it's a descendant of RPGs.
Yeah.
Obviously it's a direct descendant of the pen and paper.
Yep.
And so I feel like the Blizzard games tend to Diablo, same thing.
Diablo's sort of a hybrid of dungeon delving game and RPG, yeah.
Right. So I feel like all their games, and part of the reason they work well for me is because they do have kind of a board gamey-ness to them.
It'd be interesting to see the games Blizzard released before they had their big three. I know they had a bunch of other ones, but I don't know if they're board gaming.
I have Justice League Task Force for my SNES.
Yeah,
just it's pretty bland.
Side scroller
fighting game. One-on-one.
Oh, it's a fighting game?
Yeah.
That's not board game.
No, not very board game. But yeah, they have some odd titles in their early library. But that's neither here nor there. I don't think that'll be another chit chat. So now we will send over to me for the tutorial of Munchkin. Now I'm going to teach you how to play Munchkin. Munchkin is a take-that style card game that has players moving through the dungeon, kicking open doors, and fighting various monsters. The goal of the game is to reach level 10. The three main ways you get a level are by killing a monster, playing a go up a level card, and by selling items worth 1,000 gold. The first player to hit level 10 wins, and the game ends immediately. Munchkin comes with 2 decks of cards, the door deck and the treasure deck, along with a 6-sided die. There are various card types in the game, which I'll go through now. First card type are race cards. At the top of the card, you'll see the name of the race, then some effect text wrapped around the art, and finally at the bottom, the card type, in this case, a race card. You can only have 1 race card in front of you at a given time, and there are 3 races in the base game. If you do not have a race card, you are considered to be a human. There are also class cards. They work similarly to the race cards and have the same layout. In addition, you can only have 1 class card in front of you at a time, unless you have a special card out. Then, there are one-time use items. These items can only be used once, and they'll say so at the bottom. In addition, they'll usually have a gold value at the bottom that you can use to sell for levels, which I'll explain shortly. Then there are more permanent items. These items have the name of the item at the top, any bonus it gives you in combat, and then the types of classes that can use it. At the bottom, you'll see the slots it consumes and the amount of gold it's worth. If an item is big, you can only have 1 of them out at a given time, no matter what. Otherwise, you may hold all the items you like. However, some items occupy a certain slot, like a headgear slot. You can only have 1 of each of these active at a time. If an item does not have a slot, then you may simply stack as many as you like. Then there are a variety of go-up-a-level cards. They all have different names, but the same effect. You can play them anytime, and you can play them on any player. Then there are the all-important monster cards. The monsters range from a potted plant to a plutonium dragon. The monsters have the name of the monster at the top, any effects above the art, sometimes below, and bad stuff at the bottom. Bad stuff will apply if you do not defeat the monster or if you fail to run away. At the bottom, you also might see a number of levels. If you do not see a number of levels, it is assumed that you gain 1 level from defeating the monster. Otherwise, you gain the number described. And you'll see how many treasures the monster is worth. If you defeat the monster successfully or dissipate it with a card effect, then you gain that many treasures from the treasure deck. Next up, there are monster modifiers. These can be played on a monster that is in combat at any time, even if you're not the one fighting it. These can enhance or weaken a monster. Next up are curses. If you reveal a curse during the kick open the door phase, then it applies to you immediately. Otherwise, you can play it from your hand at any time on another player. And finally, there are special cards. Special cards have a wide variety of effects, and there don't seem to be any blanket rules covering them all. To begin a game of Munchkin, you'll have to go on a special pre-game quest to find a method of tracking each player's level. The game does not include one, so you'll need to find some pennies or tokens or a pad of paper. Once you've done so, each player will be dealt 4 cards on the top of both decks, the door deck and the treasure deck. Then, each player can immediately play any race or class cards available to them. Remember, you can only have 1 race and 1 class card out at a given time. Then, each player may play any items in front of him that he wishes to. You do not have to be able to actually get use from the item in order to play it in front of you. For instance, a thief could play a card that says not usable by thief for purposes of trading later. The same is true of one-time use items. You do not have to use them in order to play them in front of you. Then, any cards drawn that aren't those are placed in your hand, and you randomly determine the starting player, and that player can begin his first turn. Munchkin is played in a series of turns. On your turn, you'll go through 4 steps. The first step is to kick open the door. When you kick open a door, you'll flip the top card of the door deck. If it's a monster, you'll have to fight it immediately. If it's not a monster, you'll simply show it to every player and that add it to your hand. However, if you're fighting a monster, you'll need to have a bonus greater than its level. Your bonus is a combination of your current level, plus any bonuses accrued from weapons in front of you that you can use, and one-time weapons that you can use from your hand, such as Magic Missile. If you cannot defeat the monster, you have two options. You can either ask other players for help or run away. If you ask other players for help, you agree beforehand on how to divvy up any treasure received from the monster. If the players choose to help you, you'll add all of their level and combat bonuses to your combat bonus to try to overcome the monster's level. Otherwise, you have to run away. If you try to flee, you'll roll the d6. On a roll of 5 or greater, you'll successfully escape the monster. Otherwise, the monster catches you and applies bad stuff. If you defeat the monster, either alone or with a friend, you'll get treasures. If you defeat it alone, you'll draw the number of treasures face down and simply add them to your hand. If you defeat it with a teammate, then you'll divvy up the treasures face up. After that, if you do not find a monster, you can instead look for trouble. This means you'll be playing a monster card from your hand in front of you and acting as though you had just found it in the room. This follows the same formula that fighting a monster you found on the door deck does. If you do not find a monster in the room and do not look for trouble by playing one of your own, you can now loot the room. To do so, simply draw the top card of the door deck and place it face down in your hand. The last step of the turn is called charity. If you have more than 5 cards in your hand, you must give cards away to other players, specifically the player with the lowest level. Once you're down to 5, your turn ends and the next player's turn begins. Now you know how to play Munchkin. Now that you know how to play Munchkin, we're going to take a look at it in our point-counterpoint review, now with more counterpoints.
Because Mike and I disagree about Munchkin, I'm going to argue for the game.
And I'm going to tell you why it barely even qualifies as a game, Tom.
That's funny. Almost as funny as this game. This game is about funny. The theme is funny. It's a parody game. It's let's be Munchkins, let's explore a dungeon, but it's all parody of a role-playing game, if you will. And the theme of that, the everything about the game fits into that theme. So not only do you have like evocative monsters like the gazebo, everybody knows the gazebo, but you have silly stuff like the potted plant and the floating nose.
Because the gazebo is very serious.
Yeah, well, every time I encounter a gazebo in D&D, I run the other way. I don't know about you.
Wise words.
But then you also have the fun action cards, out to lunch and cheat and things like that. It's all fun. The rules are fun. The rules not only poke fun at the person reading them, but the game itself, the art. It's all like it's a singing and dancing sword, not just a dancing sword. There you go. Everything about the game is fun and funny. So, tell me, why isn't it a game?
Well, you're half right, Tom. Everything about the game is funny, but certainly not fun. There is no depth of gameplay to Munchkin. I mean, it's as shallow as a very shallow thing, Tom. It's just very shallow.
Kiddie pool. Shallow as a kiddie pool?
Shallow, let's go with that. Shallow as a kiddie pool. There's just nothing to it. It's what I like to call a flip and laugh game, where you're simply flipping over cards, saying, "Oh, that's so funny looking. Aren't we having a good time with these cards that are so funny?" And there's just nothing to it. There's no decision making. There's the bare minimum amount of strategy and tactics in this game. It's practically nil. And even if you're into it, even if you find the game somehow stimulating, even if you really enjoy the flipping the cards and you really are into the art and you do, find the gazebo hilarious, even if it does it for you, there are 50 expansions for a reason, Tom. There has practically no replay value. Once you see the floating nose once, unless you have some sort of issue, you're not going to find it funny every time. It just isn't going to hold up to repeated plays. It doesn't even hold up to one play for me.
Well, it's harsh. It's a little harsh to say that. Because, yeah, it is a flip and laugh game, but really that's kind of the point. You're flipping over cards, you're assembling your character, and the point about the laughter is that you're kind of making fun of each other at the table, and yourself at the same time. It's easy fun. It's the insults, if you will, the backstabbing, the jibing. they all come together and they do it almost effortlessly. The game does that part for you and allows you to just, sit back, let the game be the reason that you guys are sort of insulting each other. Take that, giving you the take that, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree. You can play it mindlessly and let it wash over you, and that's fine. But it's not a game that's inherently social. I think it's a game that's trying to sort of stimulate conversation at the table. It's trying to make, have you interacting with your friends and joking and laughing. But nothing in the game really does that. With the game, you're kind of experiencing it. You're seeing the cards. You're laughing at them. But it doesn't actually make you. The game does not drive the conversation. So for a good social game like I Dark Overlord, Wise and Otherwise, party games like Catchphrase, Gloom. Gloom is a similar kind of game where it's predominantly luck. Mm-hmm. But with Gloom, you explicitly have to tell a story. With I Dark Overlord, the whole game is storytelling. It's giving excuses to the Overlord to try to get out of the punishment. And those games, the cards directly drive the story. If you have a potted plant card in Dark Overlord, you have to work it into your excuse. You have to say, I tripped over a potted plant, or a potted plant, there's an emergency potted plant delivery, and you have to really ham it up, and you have to play the game in a way that is social and that is going to be entertaining for everybody. With this, things are just happening, and I am party to them.
Well, I think Steve Jackson would argue that you're going to get out of this game what you put into it. That's maybe the point of Munchkin, is that you need to bring your own socialist to the table, because we're here just munchkining it up. We're just worried about assembling the best character we can. But the point is relevant, that it does have pretty limited replay value, that it's not a core social game, that these things are relevant. And you're right, there's a reason that there's 50 expansions. But boy, there's 50 expansions. Like you said it all, if you like this game at all, you're going to get tired of seeing the gazebo and the floating nose. But you can always buy whatever else comes down the line. The
Space Munchkin, Zombie Munchkin.
Yeah.
Munchkins are us. That's not that's everyone, but
not yet.
It could be.
It's in development.
Rubber Duck Munchkin. There's just so many different ones. Yes, I agree with that.
So I think the point of the game is that you get out of it what you bring into it, and you can't say that it's not completely social, because it does have a little element of, in the rules it says you need to argue about this point, and some of the cards say feel free to argue about this point. So there you go.
Sure. And while I really like Steve Jackson, and I think that his company does a lot to kind of further gaming and to get people into it, they have the great website where you can promote your local convention. So I have no problem with the company in that way, but the games just don't do it for me. You mentioned the arguing thing. I find it honestly a little bit offensive in this game that the rulebook explicitly, in several places, pushes you to argue about the rules. Now, there are very few rules in this game. It's very fast and loose. The rules are intentionally left open-ended.
Right.
And then it kind of pokes fun at the reader of the rulebook, saying, oh, you're a munchkin, so you must like arguing about rules, right? That's fun for you. Well, I'm a pretty serious gamer. I like to win. Mm-hmm. I like to play hard. When a rules debate comes up, I will certainly hash it out, but I don't look for rules arguments. And I was a little bit honestly offended when I read that in the rulebook and when that came up at the table, because it's not like when I'm playing a game that I'm heavily invested in, like, say, Thunderstone. Mm-hmm. If there's something that's a little bit confusing, like a hero dying when they have 0 strength in the old version, not in the new version, that's going to be something that needs to be resolved. And it needs to be resolved at the time, but I'm not looking for that kind of ambiguity, and I'm not looking for that argument. I'm just invested in the game, and I want to resolve it fairly. With this, it's nonsense to say that you should have rule arguments, because there are practically no rules. And I feel like that's kind of, in some ways, a cruel parody and kind of a harsh parody of Munchkinism.
I suppose it could hit a little close to home, especially if you're a serious gamer. But I have to say that I think that's kind of the point, that we're poking fun at everything about the role-playing Munchkin genre. So I'm going to have to give it a moderately high rating. It's not my favorite kind of game, but it is a highly social game, despite the fact that it doesn't inherently possess social attributes. But I do enjoy it. It is a good excuse to get together with your friends, and If you want to play a game, great. Otherwise, just throw some cards on the table. It's the same thing.
I couldn't have said that last part better myself. If you want to play a game, play one. If you want to throw cards on the table, you have Munchkin.
I give it a 5 out of 10.
You did. You give it 2 5s out of 10, but I'm assuming those out of 10. But I will give it a 1 out of 10. This is my least favorite game on the list. This is probably the only game we'll look at this season that I do not own in my collection. This one does not work for me. Like I said, it's a flip and laugh game. This game is happening, and I'm sometimes present for it, but I don't feel like I'm playing it. It has no engaging decision making. The cards are funny only the first time. I'm not pulled into a storytelling experience or a social experience. If I'm playing with other funny people, maybe we can entertain each other, but that would have nothing to do with the game. We could do that while doing any activity, and the game certainly doesn't get the credit for it. Other games that are more social, they kind of force us to be funny. They trigger funny moments. Those I enjoy. Munchkin falls completely flat for me.
Your rating?
1 out of 10.
There you have it. Get ready for the breakdown. This is the breakdown of Munchkin from Steve Jackson Games. Your game time will vary wildly. You can have lots of players, but someone can get lucky and it'll end quickly. But otherwise, it can take a long time. So we give it 50 short and 50 long. Individual turns are short, but you are often playing cards on other players' turns, so we give it 10 slow and 90 fast. Both the door and treasure decks are completely random, so we give it 95 luck, but there is some skill involved in timing your card plays, so we give it 5 skill. Because Munchkin has so little skill, it's hard to give it a strategy and tactics rating, but each turn you are trying to maximize your points so you can level up. There's some strategy in trading your cards, so we give it 95 tactics and 5 strategy. Your main concern is leveling up your character, but most of the game is filled with helping or messing with the other players, so we give it 20 independence and 80 interaction. Both the decks feature lots of fun things like goofy, dungeon denizens, and backstabbing, so we give it 95 immersion. We give it 5 abstraction because it's hard to get past the constant point grabbing. We give it 75 simplicity. It's easy to learn, you don't have to have much invested in it to play it. But we give it 25 complexity because it does have some Munchkin-y rules and because of the overall free-form nature of the game might be off-putting to hardcore gamers. We give it 85 portability and 15 grandeur. The basic game is really just 2 decks and a rulebook and a box, but there is a deluxe edition you can get a level up board from if you like. We give it 100 expandability. The charm of this game is the novelty of discovering the floating nose and building a super Munchkin for the first time, but you'll need new content to hold on to that feeling. For originality, we give it 5 trophies. It's basically a flip and laugh game, and it's really the first of its kind. Games like Killer Bunny probably wouldn't exist without it. For value, we give it 3 trophies. The components are good, it's inexpensive. It'd get a higher rating if it included a level up tracker. Mike gives it 1 out of 10, Tom gives it 5 out of 10, and that is the breakdown of Munchkin.
We hope you had a good laugh with us today in Munchkin. Next week in the Chit Chat, we're going to be talking about player mentality, the idea of shared expectations, alpha gaming, king making, and other aspects of the game that are just outside the game. And we're going to be playing Galaxy Trucker, the fun spaceship building game.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel for weekly updates. See the links below for our Facebook and Twitter pages, and leave us a comment on your favorite flip and laugh game.
See you next week.
Rolling. Episode 13, Small Talk, take 1.
God, it feels weird over here. Does it feel weird over there?
No.
It feels really weird over here.
It's about to get weird.
You said it's weird.
Welcome to Small Talk.